Hello and welcome back to San Juan County Council's Tuesday, August 18th, 2020 meeting. We had a short recess. My apologies for being a few minutes late in restarting. We are now beginning our public hearing, which is about an hour late. The first public hearing is to approve the sale of surplus personal property at public auction with Van Every, ER&R manager. Van, are you on the line?
Yeah, I am. Good morning. This is Van from San Juan County Fleet Services. We first talked about this surplus list on 7/28. We're here today to fulfill our requirement with the public hearing portion of that. The list had 5 items on it, and we went over values and life expenditures on that. And if anyone has any questions, I would take them now. And other than that, we're dealing with the public hearing portion.
Mr. Watson, do you have any questions? You're muted.
Yep, no questions at this time.
Great, thank you. Mr. Stevens?
I don't have any questions at this time.
All right, thank you very much. I do not have any questions as well. So we will now go into the public comment or public testimony part of this public hearing. And again, this is public hearing to approve the sale of surplus personal property at public auction. I'm looking, is anyone on the line would like to provide public comment regarding this public hearing? I'll ask again, everyone on the line, is there anyone who would like to provide public comment or public testimony regarding this public hearing? Ingrid, we have not received any comments via mail. There's no comments via mail. So I will close this public hearing, the public testimony section of this public hearing with the right to reopen. I don't have any further questions, Council. I'd entertain a motion if both of you are there, or do you have any questions?
I have no questions.
I have no questions. We covered all of our questions pretty much the last time.
Great. Well, I'd entertain a motion for approval.
So, Mr. Chair, I move we approve the resolution to dispose of surplus county personal property by public auction.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to approve the sale of surplus personal property at public auction. Are there any other questions or comments? Without seeing any, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries 3-0. Thank you, Van. I appreciate your time in bringing this forward.
Thank you, Council.
Our next public hearing is to adopt an ordinance revising the 2020 county budget for emergency appropriation. Mylene Henley, the auditor. Mylene, are you online? I think I see you.
There I am.
Oh, there we go.
Yes, coming in.
So, Mylene, first of all,
Hello, I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yep.
This is the first time I participate. Sorry.
Oh no, I was just gonna say we received some information from you last night, and I have not had an opportunity to look at it yet. If you could really quickly brief us on that, that would be great, and then go into this first related to this public hearing.
Sure. Well, basically, what I sent you was a summary of what we've been doing for the last several weeks. I don't think there's anything here that is new. Although I should probably look at this report again, because this has been, it's been a very long process putting this together. I guess there is a new a new grant in juvenile court that has not been mentioned, but it's all going to go through the grant fund. This is the first time I'm doing this from my office, and the sound seems to be coming through my phone instead of my computer. So if I get to light and volume, let me know. It's because I'm facing the wrong direction. So it is really just a summary, as I said, of all the things we've talked about before. I would note there are 8 funds where we did not take the 5% reductions because the revenue in those funds is not something, the revenue in those funds is unrelated to current expense and is secure on its own. And those are the 2 land bank funds, noxious weeds, auditor doc cres, affordable housing. A small part of that is sales tax related, but it's a very small part. The 2 clean water utility funds and solid waste. I also, this is not something you said to do, but I did not take the 5% reductions in a mental health tax fund, even though it is funded by sales tax, so it's definitely seeing less revenue this year. But there had been a comment that this was probably not a good time to be reducing mental health services, given the need for them now. So I made the decision to leave that untouched as far as the 5% reductions. All of these you can change, of course, if you like. All of the grants are now in there, and this whole thing has been a moving target. So I think the best way to proceed is for you to ask questions. If you want a single document to look at, the best document to look at is probably the summary of appropriations. I can share my screen. That might be helpful.
Thank you.
Let me know when that's visible to you.
Bill and Jamie, are you able to read this?
Yep, it came through.
Great, thank you, Mylene. Please continue.
So this first page is just the general fund, the current expense fund, and it shows for each department over here on the left the current budget as amended, the first two columns, the emergency appropriation changes, the supplemental appropriation changes, and then the final budgets. On the next page, the rest of the general funds, which includes the grants fund and then 3 funds that are funded primarily by transfers from the current expense fund, which is why they are also general funds. And then, sorry, I didn't mean to move that quite so quickly. So again, it shows the changes in the emergency appropriations ordinance and the changes in the supplemental appropriations ordinance separately. And the last page is the changes to all the other funds. Now, in these, a change can take place without it being visible, because if expenses go down and that's all that happens, that will be absorbed by ending cash. So it may look like there were no changes, but there were. One of the things that I did in this in the emergency appropriation is to reduce all of the wages by calculated percentage to reflect furlough savings. So, do you have any questions?
Mr. Stevens?
Yeah, I was just wondering where this summary report is, other than on our screen.
It's in the back of her memo at the last 3 pages of it.
So the auditor's report, after a gazillion pages of changes, yes, the last 3 pages of it are this report.
Thank you.
You're welcome. It is a lot of data because there are a lot of changes.
And the bottom line, Mylene, is we reduced the budget by the 2020 budget by $900,000.
Yes, basically.
Again, sales math rounding off.
So, Mr.
No, that's
Chair,
accurate. There's so many changes that go into it, but yes, the bottom line is the budget went down by about $1 million.
Yes,
so
Mr.
Mr.
Tom.
Chair. Yeah, if I was just going to focus in on, the discussion today. It's been a lot about the current expense reduction. So if you look at page 1, you can. Oh, actually, Mylene, it's page 1 of 3. So the last. Yep.
Okay,
Yeah. So anyway, so it's what Bill was talking about. So what is the total reduction in current expense, factoring in furloughs that we have? So it's that $895,890 is a figure. So it's really the 981,390 minus the 850,500 gets you that number. So that's the total impact of the current expense fund.
Can you say that again? What was the second number you gave, the 850? What was that number?
Oh, I'm just looking to see the emergency appropriations column. It's at 981, 390.
I see that. Well, you gave a second number, 850,000.
Yeah, the next column over is the 85,500.
Got it. Sorry. Thank you.
And that's how you come up with the 895,890 reduction in the current expense fund.
Got it. All right. Thank you, Mr. Thomas. I'm sorry. So, Mr. Watson, or do you have any? Where are you? Or sorry, Mr. Stevens, where are you?
I'm right here. I'm sorry.
Mr. Stevens,
Not question about. Hello?
Yeah. Do you have any other questions, Jamie?
No, I don't.
I don't have any questions either.
I turned off my camera because I had to lean way in to see the numbers.
Okay, no problem. So I think, and Mylene, I don't have any questions either. We had talked about continuing this public hearing. I know I need to do public comment or public testimony. Well, let's just, never mind. Let's just do that. So at this point, are there any other questions for Mylene or Mike?
Nope.
I don't.
All right. So at this point, I would like to open the public testimony, public comment section of this public hearing. And again, the public hearing is to adopt an ordinance revising the 2020 county budget for emergency appropriations. There was Ingrid, I would just like to confirm, I do not think we received any public comment via email. Is that correct?
That is correct.
We have no public comment via email. And at this point, I will open up if anyone who would like to provide public comment via our Skype call-in or the call-in, please unmute yourself and look at that and provide that comment now. Is there anyone who would like to provide public comment regarding the ordinance revising the 2020 county budget for emergency appropriations? Please unmute yourself. At this point, I do not see any public testimony or public comment, so we will close the public testimony portion of this public hearing with the right to reopen. Mylene, you would suggest that at one point, or we had discussed potentially moving this to the 25th. I'm interested in spending a little bit more time with this, but I'm not sure where council's at. Mr. Stevens?
We had talked about continuing it even before this meeting, so I'm pretty sure everything is in there that we had talked about. So if you want more time, that's fine.
Mr. Watson?
If I may, sorry,
Go ahead, Mylene.
Oh, I was just going to say that although this is the first time you've seen all of it, it is everything that you have talked about. So yes, I have no problem with continuing it. And I also feel like you could adopt it today if you feel ready to.
All right, so Mr. Chair, I'll make a motion that we continue the public hearing to adopt an ordinance revising the 2020 county budget for emergency appropriations to August 25th at 9:15 a.m.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to continue a public hearing to adopt an ordinance revising the 2020 county budget for emergency appropriations to Tuesday, August 25th at 9:15 a.m. Is there any other additional comments or questions?
No.
No.
Without hearing you, all those in favor say aye.
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 Opposed? Motion carries 3-0. Thank you very much. Our third public hearing for this morning is to adopt an ordinance revising the 2020 county budget for supplemental appropriations, again with Mylene Henley, auditor. Mylene?
My comments apply to both ordinances. They have to be separately adopted, which is why there are two public hearings, but I have nothing more to add.
Mr. Watson?
No questions.
No question. I'm sorry.
No, good.
No question.
At this point, I don't have any questions either. At this point, in the public testimony section or part of this public hearing, Is there anyone, Ingrid, just to confirm, no one has provided email comments regarding that? At this point, if there is anyone who would like to provide public testimony regarding the adoption of an ordinance revising the 2020 county budget for supplemental appropriations, please unmute yourself and provide comment at this point. And again, I would like to ask if there's anyone who'd like to provide public testimony or public comment at this point regarding this ordinance. Without seeing any, I will close the public testimony part of this public hearing with the right to reopen. I don't have any questions. I'd be more than willing to continue this on. If anyone would like to bring a motion forward, I would be interested.
Mr. Chair, I move we continue the public hearing to adopt an ordinance revising the 2020 county budget for supplemental appropriations till August 25th, 2020 at 9:15 a.m.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to adopt an ordinance revising the 2020 county budget for supplemental appropriations to continue it on to the 25th of August at 9:15 a.m. in Friday Harbor, Washington. Are there any other questions?
Nope.
Nope.
Without seeing all those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries 3-0. Council, we have on the agenda to go into the COVID-19 update. I was thinking Mylene's here and we're already talking finance. Would you all be okay if we switch the agenda items, assuming she's okay with that at this point?
Fine with me.
Yep. So, Mr. Chair, when did you want to talk about the county clerk's budget adjustment that we talked about at the beginning?
Well, we can talk about that now if you'd like.
Again, I'm not suggesting that we modify the current amendment that's under discussion, but should council, I think, agree that we were not expecting to do employee impacts and thus reverse out that reduction? Or Mylene, could you tell us whether that reduction is in this amendment or not in this amendment, I guess is the question.
That the reduction is included in the amendment. That is basically what the clerk proposed, the only thing the clerk proposed. There was some very minor travel and training, which everybody eliminated or reduced. I believe that it was a redefining how the work would be done in that office. And yes, it does involve a RIF of a part-time employee.
Right.
So council was not aware of that. But it is included in the budget. The cost for putting it back in this year would be $10,000. For putting it back into next year is about $23,000.
Right. So is it your recommendation that we not try to modify the current amendment and we just take care of it in the next amendment?
If you don't modify it, then the part-time position will be laid off. So if you don't amend it now, then there is, okay. Are we amending the amendment or I think council needs to decide whether you want to take the proposal or not.
Which is why I wanted the continuation for the meeting today. So I think we should, well, Mr. Stevens, where are you? I know where you are. My apologies. Mr. Stevens, what are your comments and questions regarding the position?
It throws me off. And if you want to discuss it on the amendment to the amendment, or maybe we should decide now so that.
It would certainly be helpful to have accurate documents next week.
Correct.
All right. So then
make a decision and ask the Mylene to either not, if we decide not to move forward, or if we decide we want to support the request from the clerk, that we make that change now.
Yeah. So I make a motion that we modify our previous decision and we don't require the county clerk to reduce her force by 0.4.
Second.
That's going to be a mouthful to repeat. So we have a motion and a second to modify the ordinance revising the 2020 county budget for emergency appropriations. Is that correct?
Yep.
For 2020 to reflect not riffing the county clerk's person. Is that fair enough? Is that the gist of it?
Yep.
Are there any questions or comments? All right, all those in favor say aye.
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 Opposed? Motion carries 3-0.
And so just to be clear, then Mylene has authority to go and modify the current public hearing version so that it reflects that for the continued meeting for next week.
Correct, and I would assume that that means adding back $10,000 for 2020 and then in the placeholder for 2021, the 23,000.
I haven't really changed 2021 yet anyway.
Right. Okay.
Great. Thank you, Council. Bill, thank you for bringing that forward. I appreciate it.
May I raise one more question, Mr. Hughes?
Sure.
Since we're talking about amending the amendment, Mr. Stevens pointed out to me that the estimate for the county, for the state audit this year is $140,000. I believe that we would save more than that in this budget amendment. That is my assumptions for this budget amendment, that we would keep the cost down to about 100. I think we should put that 40,000 back into the budget. I don't think it will cost that much, honestly, but if it does, given how tight we've made the budget, I don't want that to cause a problem. So with your permission, I will increase the cost of the state audit from 100 to 140 in the budget.
So I would entertain a motion to, Mylene, can I make sure I understand what you're saying? You're saying that it's currently at 100 and you want to move it, you want to increase it to 140, or it's at 140 and you want to decrease it to 100?
Let me give you the whole story. It was adopted at 150,000. For the amendment, I proposed reducing it to 100,000, believing that we would save that much with a remote audit. It turns out the state auditor is doing it only partially remote, so we are not saving as much as we thought. And I would like to increase it and the amended to 140, which is still a reduction from the adopted budget of 150. So I would like to, go to 140.
All right, well, since this is a document, I would be interested in having a motion from council.
So, Mr. Chair, I'll move that we modify the current budget amendment as presented, increasing the state auditor's amount to $140,000.
Second for discussion here.
We have a motion and a second to modify and amend the ordinance revising the 2020 county budget for emergency appropriations to include an increase in the cost of the state auditor from $100,000 to $140,000. Mr. Stevens.
So what I was wondering, Mylene, is in that, I can't remember if the 140 includes $10,000 worth of travel. And maybe you could shed some light on this, but it just seems like the state isn't doing a lot of stuff in person.
They are conducting our audit in person to some degree. They usually bring 5 people over and they stay 4 nights a week for 3 weeks. This year they are bringing 2 people and they are staying 2 nights a week for 3 weeks, excuse me. So they have definitely reduced the travel portion. They have dramatically increased their costs over the last few years. And unfortunately, this is something we can do nothing about. We can't control the cost other than having a great audit, which we certainly always hope for, but it's not always something we get. I'm hoping that we can someday go even more remote. I think that there's no reason that most of this can't be conducted remotely. And I was surprised that they decided to come over for part of it.
That just seems a little pricey on that travel at $800+ per diem. But
Yes.
we don't even have that. We aren't even that generous.
All right, so is there any other questions to Mylene regarding this request?
No.
No.
I hope, I did speak with the two employees from the auditor's office, and one of the complaints I issued was the dramatic increase in the cost of the audit every year. And while I agree and appreciate the great work that they're doing from the state, again, coming even in a COVID half occupancy period of time is still the most expensive time of the year when they're coming. And if there's a way they could make it more affordable for the county, would be greatly appreciated, because I think it's risen almost $100,000 over the last 8 years. All right, so all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Motion carries 3-0.
Thank you.
Mylene, is there anything else that we need to amend?
I don't think so. I haven't heard any other whinings or surprises, or so that should be it.
All right, thank you. And just for a time check, it's 10:40. Are you able to go right now with the second quarter financial review, or
Yes.
should we wait until after COVID?
Not a problem.
All right,
Just
Council,
sitting near my computer.
Council, are you okay if we go to the second quarter financial review while we have the auditor online?
Yeah.
All right, Mylene?
All right, let me, oh, it doesn't let me do that. Okay, let me do this then. First, I will share my desktop, and then I will go over here. All right, are you able to see my desktop?
Yes.
Yes.
All right. If this format looks familiar, it should. I basically took the first quarter and changed the data. Last quarter, I had a danger cliff approaching road sign. I stuck with the road sign motif, but this time went with a squeeze, because that's what we've been doing budgetarily. So let's look at how we are doing. I'm going to look at the county first and current expense, focus in on some particular revenues, and then some observations at the end. So county revenue and expenditures. First, if we look at revenue by type, is my volume good? Can you hear me?
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Okay. This table shows county-wide revenue by type. The taxes up here are obviously very important to us. And I've highlighted retail sales and use tax because, as you know, it's been lower than usual. We show it at about 32% through the first half of the year, and normally at this point we're at 38%. So other than that, most things are coming in at a more or less normal rate. If we look at county expense by area, that is what it's being spent to do, these all look pretty normal. The mental and physical health is only at 43%, which when we get to current expense, you'll see it's a much higher percentage. And this is percent of budget. When it says percent used, that is percent of budget. And again, this is all through the second quarter, June of 2020. County expense by type, everything looks pretty normal. One thing that is not normal is salary and wages is above 50%. It's not a lot above 50%, but at this time of year, it is always below 50%. So the reason for that, obviously, is the early retirements where we paid, some wages ahead of time. Still, it's not an alarming percentage. Finally, these are individual county funds that have spent more than 50% through June. There's only 3 of them, which is good. Emergency management, not surprising, both because, we're managing an emergency now, and also because this fund is always over 50% at this time of year because the emergency management director is a 75% appointment and takes his time off later in the year. So he generally has worked a lot. Oops, it went on too far. So again, pretty normal. Equipment, ER&R is over 55, is about 55%. I believe that's because they have purchased some of the equipment, heavy equipment budgeted for this year. They've already purchased, and of course that will push them a little high in the first half. And IT similarly has purchased equipment, so nothing alarming here either. Going to switch to current expense, which is the county's main general fund, the fund out of which most of our familiar services are paid. Again, revenue by type. Let's look at sales and use tax, 36%. The average for the last 5 years is 40%. So definitely running well below where we usually are at this point. And other than that, there's really nothing alarming or interesting. Property tax at 57%. It's always well over 50% at this point of the year.
Other financing services or sources, sorry.
That's transfers, and I would have to look at it specifically. I don't know. I'll look that up for you, Bill. But it's because it's kind of one-offs. Yeah.
Would that include our interest earnings and that kind of stuff?
No, that would be miscellaneous revenues.
Huh.
And interest is, I'll talk more about interest later.
Yeah, okay.
I'll look up what those financing sources are for you.
All right.
Yeah, it's typically transfers, and I can't think who would be transferring into the general fund right now. Okay, if we look.
This is Jamie. Could you go back to that slide?
Yeah.
So what does that mean at the bottom about average sales and use tax? Anyway, could you explain that little box?
Yeah, that was what I said earlier. If you notice up in the table, the third line, retail sales and use tax. When I do this, can you see my cursor? And does that work as a pointer? Okay, good. So it shows that right now we've received 36% of budget. The average at this point in time, halfway through the year, for the last 5 years, we have received 40% of what we ended up collecting for the year. So I'm just saying that this is running low, which is not surprising. It's just a clear indication of it. So that's just referring to this.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Stevens, are you finished with the question?
Yes.
So Mylene, on that note, so again, using my sales math, so that means we're roughly about $314,000 behind on the retail sales and use tax. Does that sound about right?
I can't tell you that. I don't know.
So basically, it's 7,862 times 0.04, which is the differences between 36.15 and 40.
Okay, that sounds about right.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome.
No one, do you have any questions?
Nope.
All right. Sorry, Mylene. Keep going.
No problem. Now, if we look at current expense by area, and you'll notice first there's a lot fewer areas in the current expense fund than there are countywide, because countywide begins to bring in things like transportation that are not included in the current expense fund. So I mentioned that health is well above 50% of spending. Not surprising. Again, we are in a health crisis, and some of this will be corrected when we amend the budget. That is, they'll have more revenue and more budget coming in.
Mylene, can I ask a quick question?
Of course.
And these numbers are all through June 30th, correct?
That's correct.
Great. Thank you.
Current expense by type. The salaries and wages are even more farther above 50% in the current expense than they were countywide. And that's because all of the early retirements.
And the furloughs haven't really had much impact yet because it was only June.
Right, because that just started in May. But all of the early retirements were in the current expense fund. There were a couple of partial hits on some other funds, but it was basically all current expense. So that's why salary and wages are high. Everything else, the capital outlays, that's some equipment that the sheriff bought. Now, these are current expense departments that have spent more than 50% through June. That's not necessarily a bad thing. It's just something that I look at to see if we are approximately on par for spending the right amount through the year. They are in ascending order. Superior Court, I don't know why they're a little high. Oh, I know why they're high, sorry. All of these departments, except for operating transfers, which is not what I call an operating department, but all of the operating departments had early retirements. Facilities, leading the pack at 67% of budget, had 3 early retirements. Now, this will be amended in the budget because we will be putting in the cost of those early retirements, and then they won't look so bad after the budget is amended. So because all of these were basically caused by early retirements, nothing alarming here. All right, so what we're really interested now is revenue. How are we doing revenue-wise? So I'm going to look at specific revenues that are significant to the county. Sales tax, yay. And then for this, I'm looking through July just because the data was available and it was easy to run these reports through July. And all of these, the thick red line is 2020. This form of the report shows every month what the receipt was. And for some of these, I'll also show you cumulative, so year to date. So sales tax. And now I'm trying to remember if this is current expense or look at the next slide. Anyway, the pattern would be similar. One thing you can see is that the pattern of receipt is clearly the same as every other year. It's a little lower. July, just focusing on the most recent year, was below 2015, 2017, and 2019 in revenue. We go to the next slide. This is the cumulative view. Where we started out, on par, once the bad news hit, we start trending downwards. And we're now well below last year in receipts and a little bit below 2018. Lodging tax, which is a subset of sales tax, and of course we know it was extremely hard hit, started out with a fairly normal year. I don't know what happened in February. That was pre-COVID, but anyway. And then, nosedived in May, and there was literally zero revenue in June. I've never seen a month with zero revenue before. In fact, it was negative, but they didn't make us give money back. July, we start to see some receipts because, and July is early, really, because the 50% occupancy allowance started in the middle of June. The cumulative report, again, start pretty normally and then start trending downward to where we're clearly now well below the previous 5 years. As I said, the allowance for 50% occupancy started in June. June revenue is received in August, and July, where a full 50% is allowed, we'll see in September. So these numbers will begin to improve. There's no doubt we will end the year well below prior years. The question is, how low? Property tax, our old friend, is well above prior years, and that is the levy lift. So thank you, voters. Land bank. Now this graph is through June. Land bank had been going along pretty nicely, well below 2018. a little below 2019. And then this happened. This is July. July, I am told, was the biggest income month that the land bank has ever had in its history. So, wow, that was nice. So cumulatively, we were running along, so about the same as 2019, and then went way up here and are now ahead of 2018, which at this point in time in the year was well ahead of 2019. So real estate excise tax, which is an important revenue source for the land bank and for a capital improvement plan.
July activity, or is it June's activity?
I beg your pardon?
So how much time delay in the reporting on REIT?
It's instant. And well,
Okay.
not instant. It's daily. Yeah.
Okay.
There is no delay.
No delay. Thank you.
Yeah. So this is going along very nicely. Now, the real question is, was July an aberration? Are we going to see something more like this, or is it going to continue high? Word on the street is it's a pretty active market out there, a lot of cash sales, people running away from the pandemic maybe, or maybe just a coincidence. So we'll see what happens in August. Permits and planning, which are kind of related to the land bank because they're both real property transactions. Looking at it monthly, you can see that, like the land bank, had a strong June and July. And cumulatively, although still behind the years 2016 through 2018, is beating the budget for where it should be at this point in the year. Is that a phone ring?
Sorry.
So the revenue here, I think the important message is it's doing better than we initially expected, and that is good. Interest, Bill, you had asked about interest.
Marlene, hold on a second before you move on. Can you go back to the permit revenue? What's the delta between budget and actual so far?
Well, you mean where?
So where are we? I mean, how far off are we on permit revenue?
At this point, what I said is that for where it should be at this time of the year, I would say that it is ahead of the budget. Permitting revenue, more than many, is highly variable from month to month. So, yeah, if one extrapolates from where we are now, it is likely to beat budget.
At the end of the year, because again, sort of subjectively, I've heard from several builders that they're getting calls at a higher rate than they ever have before.
Well, that's good. That's good. We want people to both stay employed and keep generating revenue for the county. And if people stay employed, that's the most important thing. Okay, so did you have other questions about that, Rick?
No, thank you.
Okay. Interest earnings. Interest earnings, what's been happening with interest is our higher paying securities are all being called because the interest rate is going down. So what happens is we get a little bump when those are paid off, but then what we replace it with lower paying securities, or it goes into LGIP. So where we started kind of on track with 2019, and this is one, I think I can say, well, almost, this has gone up almost every year for the last 5 years. We started out pretty good, and then things started getting called, and now, we're on a declining trend. LGIP, and that's the local government investment pool that most our residual cash is in, is now at 0.26%. We have seen it lower back in 2009 or that era. I got down to 0.17, I know, at one point. But yeah, so interest is way off. So, summary, I would say on the expenditure side, we are on track for the current budget. Once we reduce the budget, it will be a little bit high. That's one of the reasons it's important to get this budget adopted. So managers will be looking at the corrected budget. On the revenue side, it's kind of a mixed bag. The sales tax projection is declining monthly, by which I mean that the projection model that I use every month, the amount it's projecting as percent of budget where we will finish has gone down. We're now looking at 87% of budget. I think August and September will be really important because that will begin to show when we were really open for tourism, which is a big factor. Of course, construction is also insignificant, and that is looking good. Lodging tax has also been declining monthly and is currently projecting at 50% of budget. Because of the, we're still at only a 50% allowed occupancy, my fear is that this one will get lower. I actually think they will both get lower, but I'm concerned about lodging tax possibly going down to 45 or 40. Property tax, as always, is stable. Interest rates have nosedived, and real property transactions are going strong. So, what to expect for next year and the balance of this year? It's important to understand that this year the county is being buoyed up by grants, which will probably disappear in 2021. The real question is what's going to happen in the broader economy. Will this recession continue, or will we quickly grow out of it? The U curve versus V curve argument. Unemployment benefits have been reduced. They didn't go away. Fortunately, there was some movement, but they're reduced. Schools, by all counts, seem to be unlikely to fully reopen, which means that and I'm talking about the broader economy, which may keep parents out of work. And one of the bigger questions is businesses affected by this, by the economy this year. How many of those will not recover from that? Ultimately, economic recovery here and throughout the country and the world will depend on controlling the virus. And unfortunately, that's something we have no schedule for. So I remain concerned about 2021. And that's it.
All right, thank you, Mylene. Is there any comment from Mr. Stevens? Do you have any comments or questions?
I just think Mylene's last slide, I think, as those unemployment bonus either goes away or is severely reduced. The problem is with the way our businesses are, the ones that are operating, the way they're operating, there's really no job to go back to. So, I just think as one example, the restaurant across the street is doing total takeout. It's being run by the owners, the husband and wife, and they normally would be employing probably 10 people through December. So those 10 people, whoever they were, the pickings are pretty small elsewhere. That's it.
Thank you, Jamie. Mr. Watson?
No questions at this time.
All right, I do not either. Thank you, Mylene, for the information.
Welcome.
Wow.
All right, so continuing on in our agenda. Mark, are you available?
Yes, thank you, Chair. Kyle Dodd, Environmental Health Manager. Good morning, Council. So this is your weekly COVID emergency response update. quick situation update. The statewide numbers as of this morning are 68,283 cases. The number of new cases each day is steadily decreasing, and I'll graphically show that a bit later when we switch over to the epi curve. Locally, we are at 32 cases. So 2 new cases since last council meeting. Both of those cases are Orcas related. So case number 31, a county resident who was tested off island, and based on the date of travel and the date of positive test, it was likely acquired out of county. And there were no close contacts as a result of that investigation that required quarantine. Case number 32 was a travel-related case, similar to the individual who flew in from out of state to San Juan Island. This was a individual who flew in from out of state and drove up from SeaTac, was on Orcas for approximately 4 days, became symptomatic the day of arrival, was tested on Orcas the day prior to leaving, was positive, and that case investigation started Friday afternoon, went through the weekend, and as a result of that, there were no close contacts that required quarantining. So that's an update from where we are with cases. I will say from a response standpoint that a lot of our strategies are ongoing, and as a result of that, we have decreased our AM briefing calls from 2 per week down to 1 per week. And we are still revising our incident action plan on Monday and then reviewing that with the entire team on the AM brief on Tuesday. And that will be the schedule moving forward for the time being. A lot of conversations over the last week regarding schools and school reopening. The health officer made a recommendation for schools in the county to commence with remote distance learning, at least in the fall, until disease rates both around the state and nationally are better controlled. As a result of that, that affects a lot of parents in the county. And in thinking that through, there was a hot topic that Brendan and his team pushed out around parents considering home-based pod or learning groups and some best management practices and guidelines around getting together as families during this time of what is expected to be remote learning this fall. So that hot topic was pushed out. I'm going to switch over to the dashboards. And okay. So this is the State Department of Health dashboard that we've been monitoring over the last several weeks. And you can see, I just wanted to continue to show the decreasing trend down the backside of this second peak. And this really shows or continues to show the deceleration and growth of new cases per day. And again, that's attributed to statewide face covering compliance and social distancing, and then also limiting interactions outside the household. So that trend is moving in the right direction. This is the governor's coronavirus dashboard. and this is a look at all of the counties in the state and what phase they're currently in, and then also shows those 5 key metrics that are used to determine whether a county is ready to proceed between phases. Obviously, we know that has been on pause indefinitely, but these metrics are still being updated. So statewide, as a state, we are not meeting the number of newly cases diagnosed in the prior 2 weeks. We're not meeting that goal. We're not meeting the goal of number of individuals tested for each new case during the prior week, nor the number of positive cases over the last week. If we zoom into San Juan County, this shows that we're meeting all but one of the goals. However, it's my assessment that this is a data error. If you look at the metric that we are not meeting as far as the number of individuals tested, if we dive down deeper in that, this is now granted this data is hasn't been updated in a couple weeks, but it is the data that's being used across the board in those other slides, and this shows that although statewide we're not meeting the metric, San Juan County is the only county that was meeting that testing metric through that time period. We can also just verify that by going to the tabular view, which should be the same data that's used in the chart view, and we see that we were meeting all of those metrics. So just wanted to dive a little bit further down into that data if there are any questions or concerns regarding that front page.
Kyle?
Yes.
So when when I go into I'm on the same page on my computer and I went into San Juan County and it has yes on everything, where are you getting the no?
So are you, and you're on the governor's coronavirus?
Coronavirus.wa.gov, what you need to know?
Yeah, so that's this, which is now frozen. Let's go to chart view here. So this is where I'm at. So if I click on San Juan County Phase 2,
because if you go to the phases on the the far left and you just type in San Juan County.
Right. So that's what I was showing as far as discrepancies within the system. So
Thank you.
So again, this is showing us on this particular view as not meeting testing, but we can look at several different angles, and if we look at just testing, we are meeting that, and I would bet that you are correct if we go just to San Juan County that we are. So just want to clear up any confusion. If somebody just lands on that main page and clicks on San Juan County, they're not tying something together there.
Yeah, Kyle, this is Frank, and we are in fact meeting the standard. I think that's just an error in their system at some point. We can help them get it straightened out. Yep.
So just wanted to touch on that, and then the last thing that I will share is this is the Institute for Disease Modeling, and this is the latest report that came out over the weekend, and this is going to be data through August 4th. So we're still looking back a couple weeks, and I don't expect that to change. We can only crunch the data and assess it so fast. But if we look at it comparatively between last week and this week, the R value for Western Washington has decreased. They're calling both R values right around 1. It looks like they're just below 1 as far as where they're representing them. Obviously, the error bars are a lot wider, but if we just look at the trend lines and where we are from week to week, as far as a state, both Western and Eastern Washington, we are trending in the right direction as far as R value or reproductive rate of the disease. So those were the updates I had for you. I can certainly answer questions, or if you have questions of Dr. James or Mark or Brendan, we can go there as well.
Mr. Stevens, do you have any questions?
No, just over the weekend, though, it was reported, and I don't know how far below, that both Eastern and Western Washington were below 1. I don't know how far below 1, but that they were both finally below 1.
Yes, and that's what I'm seeing here. I think. But
the margin of error, just to be fair, the margin of error is quite wide there. So we're around 1. So we're almost where we need to be to reduce the ongoing number of cases, given the interventions that have been made on both Eastern and Western Washington.
Mr. Stevens, do you have any other questions?
No, that's it.
Mr. Watson?
Nothing at this time.
All right. Mark, do you have any comments?
Nothing further. Kyle did an excellent job.
And Dr. James, do you have any comments or questions?
Just to say that I've been working very closely with the superintendents in all 4 districts in the county, and I think that we're on a very good footing for an initial start. We worked through a number of options and together focused on opening the schools with distance learning. I believe that's safest, not just for the children, but for the staff as well. So far, all of our cases have come from the outside, and there is not community spread at this point. I think if those trends continue, and if the state trends continue, there may be an opportunity for getting people back in schools sooner rather than later. I'd also just report I'll be at the university on Monday at a meeting about the AstraZeneca vaccine, which I'm helping to design the phase 3 trials for and the implementation for locally. And I'm very optimistic that at least 1, if not 2 vaccines will be available as early as January. There are a number of other vaccines also in phase 3 trials. This will involve testing on about 30,000 people over a period of 2 years. We'll have enough data to call the safety and efficacy information probably by January. So I think that my estimation at this point in time is worst cases we'll have some really serious medical interventions by the end of this year. And that with that, we will be able to get kids back in school and have a dramatic change in our ability to live more normal lives. It's not a certainty, but I think I would give it probable as what I would call it at this point. Between now and then, what we've seen, if you look at that chart that's still in front of you, is that we go up and down based on how careful we are. The only thing that brings those numbers down is the care with which we apply to our everyday living. And there's a cost to those things. What we found, we had a masking order in place in May, and we've benefited dramatically from that. We continue to do that. We're going to need to refine that as best we can. We're going to try to weather the last bits of the very enlarged population in our community due to tourism. We've done that. The businesses and the individuals in our county have done a great job of maintaining our kind of virus-free status within the county, our lack of community spread, to very much to their credit and very much to our benefit. But every time we let up on this, you see we had one wave that was big. We had the second wave that was even much, much larger. And what we know is we have to persevere in those things until we get some way to change the basics. And those fundamental changes are going to happen with treatments, and there are some exciting treatments emerging as well as a vaccine on the horizon. Unfortunately, what we have to do between now and then is going to be flu season, and the viral season in general happens in the fall. We're going to see the usual metapneumoviruses. We're going to see the other viruses. There are 30 of them that circulate in the fall, and that's going to be a very confusing picture for our clinicians. There isn't clear direction from the CDC or from the State Department of Health about how to manage that. I think that I hope that we don't have to rely on just our own local solutions to those problems. I hope CDC and DOH can pull together and create good, solid principles which we can all follow as a state. I'm certainly hopeful for that. But it is going to be challenging because of the introduction of all these other viruses and the fundamentals that allow their spread in the fall. I'm anticipating a better than usual flu season because so many people are wearing masks and washing hands. I think that intervention is good for all these viruses. It will reduce their spread significantly. But we're still going to be faced on the clinical side. Be patient with your providers because when they get somebody with a cough and fever, it could be a huge range of diseases. And we don't have inexpensive and accurate tests to sort those out. There are tests. They're about between $600 and $1,200. And so we're going to be faced with using the best clinical judgment we have and being as careful as we can during that time. So that's what I see for the next few months. I think we're in very good shape in San Juan County. I'm optimistic that if all the fundamentals remain solid, that we can move forward with schooling perhaps before January. But that isn't a clear picture yet. We need to not only have these numbers below 1, we need to have some of the other metrics we're looking at, the regional metrics, in good shape, but before we'll be free to do that. Happy to answer any questions if people have them.
Mr. Watson?
No questions at this time. Thanks, Dr. James.
Mr. Stevens?
Yeah, I have one. Dr. James, so just so that I'm clear, are all the districts doing distance learning and all the public school districts, and what are the private schools doing?
It is a mixed situation with the private schools. Some have expressed a strong interest or even an intention to have kind of face-to-face learning going on. I focused very much on the public schools because what they do as a whole will dramatically impact our community. If they get it wrong, it's going to impact everybody. I think they've gotten it right. I'm now beginning to work with the private schools. I think there's room for some small experiments that are carefully done. Spring Street International School, for example, they're probably the best suited to do distance learning. They're going to try to do face-to-face learning, and they're making a very careful and thoughtful plan to do that. I think that's an experiment worth trying on a small scale. The Christian school has reached out to me and indicated they're interested in moving forward with in-person learning. I think these smaller schools, in the right circumstance with the right tools, it's fair to have them do that. I don't think we all need to do the same thing, but I think the public schools are doing the heavy lifting. I mean, we've asked them not just to take the education issue on. Schools, as you know, have the responsibility of providing a safe place for kids when single parents or even when both parents are working. They've been asked to provide a nutrition component. They've been asked to provide a lot of things besides education. And I'm asking them to continue those, even with distance learning, to find creative ways to help provide a safe place for kids when parents have to work. I mean, we're all going to need to participate in that, but I think those are very important goals to have even with distance learning. So the private schools and the smaller schools, we're beginning to work with them and develop very individualized plans for them that will allow them the freedom to make those efforts, in a very calculated and thoughtful way.
Thank you.
One other thing I'll mention is there is increasing data that bandanas and what people call buffs or neck gaiters are not as effective as masks. I've been in an assessment phase on that. There's data kind of on both sides of it. It looks like those neck gaiter items are probably about 10% effective, maybe 20% effective. The average T-shirt made into a mask is about 40% effective. I think the neck gaiters, though they're very popular with a few people, particularly athletic people, I think we really need to seriously question their use and their safety in protecting other people. Also, bandanas have been shown not to be as effective in some early small studies, but I think we're back to those handmade cloth masks that are prolific in our community and very, very effective at reducing disease. And the surgical masks, those procedure masks, the paper ones, they're also effective. So I'm trying to encourage people not to use bandanas or the neck gaiter buff sort of thing until we get more data about it. The initial data is not promising. It looks like they are not as effective. Now, they reduce risk, but they're not nearly as effective as other more conventional masks.
Great, thank you, Dr. James. And I just wanted to thank you and to Mark and Kyle and Ellen Wilcox and Brendan and all of the people in the health department and to our community. If you take a look at the what you need to know dashboard and you go on the left-hand side and look at all the different metrics, San Juan County is blue in every single one of them. And in some cases, which is specifically the contact tracing and the testing, we're the only blue area in the state. So I think we all owe all of you a debt of gratitude and should be very thankful for all the good work that the county as well as our community is doing to help keep this safe. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much for pointing that out. You know, Stefan Stuckey is a phenomenal leader in our attempt at contacting, tracing, and working with each person that becomes infected. And their work is absolutely pivotal. That's what the disease comes here, and they are the ones that prevent it from spreading. And we spend hours every day, sometimes late at night, sometimes early in the morning, nailing all these things down. And that is a huge effort by a few people that keep us safe, and I really appreciate that acknowledgement. And it's Stefan and her team, our former nurses that have come back to help us, and some new nurses that have stepped onto the team. They're the people that, and they're dealing with real live people that are sick. This is very complex and interacting with big systems, hospital systems, and who don't always get things right. I mean, we were in a position this last week of having to reach out to see if even large systems can get things right when they may have not taken a detailed history. But I really appreciate that acknowledgement, not so much for me, but for those nurses that do that work every day, late at night, early in the morning, whenever the need is there. Thank you.
You're welcome. And Dr. James, I was, for the first time in this process, I was able to participate a little bit in the contact tracing portion on Orcus, and the feedback I received from the people who were contacted was just glowing, and maybe glowing is the wrong word in a situation, but in a potentially frightening situation, there was so much appreciation for how staff handled the contact tracing. Thank you again to everyone there.
Well, thank you for your help, and we do reach out. What makes it different here is that everybody, when we don't know, we know somebody that knows the people, and we can eventually get the information we need, the contacts we need, even over a weekend or in the evening or whenever we need to do it. I appreciate you helping us there and making those contacts. And again, our businesses, they respond very positively. They want to do the right thing, and that isn't true in a lot of larger communities. People have a much narrower view. Here, consistently, reliably, people do the right thing and make an extra effort, and that's much appreciated. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much. Is there anything else from Council or Mr. Thomas regarding our COVID update?
Not for me.
Not for me.
All right, well, thank you very much to all staff for providing the update. Our next discussion item is a briefing and council comments on comprehensive plan draft section B6 transportation element and appendix A6 inventory with Shannon Wilbur, senior project engineer, and Christine Gray, project engineer. Are both of you on the phone?
Good morning, council. This is Christine.
Good morning.
Shannon is also here, and although we are technology compromised with our video, we do have the presentation to share.
Great, thank you. Please continue.
Are you seeing the presentation?
Yes, we are. Thank you.
Oh, yep. Excellent. All right, so in March of this year, we met with you and reviewed our proposed changes to the transportation element. And at that time, we talked about the fact that get it to go forward, that there's a mandatory update of the comprehensive plan, and one of the elements that needed to be updated was the transportation element. And we walked through those 5 mandatory items and reviewed the updates that we had to and that we are proposing to those areas. Just a bit of a refresher, the transportation element has 2 components. One is the actual element that has the goals and policies. And then there is an Appendix 6, which provides the data and analysis that's the basis for those goals and policies. Because the Appendix 6 provides the data that we're then going to wrap into the goals and policies, in our presentation we start with the Appendix 6. And then once we get through the Appendix 6, Shannon will talk about the actual element and the goals and policies. So in March, we talked about that we've updated the element to make the format consistent, we've streamlined and we've clarified. Today, we're not going to go through all of those changes, but we wanted to make note of the fact that this is an opportunity for council to comment on any part of the appendix or the goals and policies. But we'll go through the changes that we've made since March, and those changes are pretty minor. So we have made 2 additions to the appendix. We've added a reference to the shore access that forms a part of the transportation network on the islands. And we had also talked quite a bit about intersection LOS and adding intersection LOS to our transportation element. And we've completed the projections, so we'll talk about how those projections fit into the appendix. So on shore access, we had a comment that was brought to us by one of the public comments, and they mentioned that we should include the information about shore access points. Shore access points provide or can be located at the end of a road, and those access points provide access for people to land a freight barge or a freight ferry and deliver people, vehicles. They allow for marine recreation that start and finish at those access points at the ends of roads. Some of the many shore access points are listed in the parks plan, and we just wanted to make sure that we didn't lose track of the importance of those shore access points to the transportation in the islands. Periodically, we will see that the improvements to those shore access points could be included in the Public Works Transportation Improvement Plan, or they could be included in the Parks Capital Improvement Plan. So just making sure that the appendix doesn't miss those shore access points as an important resource. Any questions on the shore access?
I do.
Sure.
This is Jamie, and I At some point, that might not be part of, I'm glad you're not losing track of that, but I think it might be worthwhile, and I know Mr. Hughes and I have both run up against this, that we kind of nail down a little bit better policy than it's a state law that it's shore access. It'd be easier when we go to improve some of these to explain to the adjacent homeowners who suddenly realize that they have a shore access, a road end where they didn't know they had a road end. And I think the picture on the left is on Lopez with the two markers there. But we've run up against this. I just think at some point we should maybe have a little more formal policy, even though they're all legal access, but we might have a little more formal policy about which ones get improved and all that stuff.
That's a great point. And when we get to goals and policies, we'll, maybe not even on this round, but it's during the process, maybe we can insert a goal and policy to develop county policies on shore access at road ends.
Thank you.
And Mr. Stevens, I don't know if you've seen this on Lopez, but I've had a lot of complaints recently or comments from property owners that are adjacent to the road end that completely accept and the fact that there's public access there, but they also feel like people are taking advantage of the public access and causing harm to their property as well. And I think we may want to look at, how do we find some kind of a balance between providing more public access, but also trying to assist that, noise violations and garbage and other things don't accumulate on these people's property. So is there a way to also monitor this public access maybe better than we have in the past, or at least to look at it? Should we allow parking overnight? And there's a bunch of things. So I'd enjoy that conversation as well.
Yeah, I agree.
To provide public access and to also protect the property owners. All right, thank you.
Wonderful. We noted that, and we will, when we get to the point of discussing the shore access policies, make sure that we include how it could be monitored and controlled so that it doesn't damage, so that that access doesn't cause negative impacts to the property owners, the private property. So the second area that we have been talking about, or that we made some minor changes to the Appendix 6 of the transportation element, is related to the intersection LOS. So in March, we talked about how intersection LOS is evaluated and kind of the basis behind the intersection LOS. And at that point, we talked about the fact that that the intersection LOS will apply to urban growth areas only. So that would be Lopez and East Sound, Lopez Village and the East Sound urban growth area. And we contracted with Transpo Group to analyze the selected intersections in Lopez Village and East Sound UGA. And those are identified on the screen. Transpo Group came out and measured peak traffic and captured that data and analyzed the data to determine what the intersection delay is, the worst case delay for those intersections, so that we could evaluate whether the intersection delay at those intersections was serious or not serious. So you'll see on the screen the idea of the level of service for intersections, and level of service, typically the industry standard is A through F, and the industry standard on unsignalized intersections is that an excellent level of service, or level service A, would be that your intersection delay would be 0 to 10 seconds. So you drive up to intersection and you have enough time to look both ways and carry on. And F would be that you wait almost a minute before you can cross through that intersection. So in analyzing the current LOS, you'll see we've shown the data, the LOS for Lopez Village, and all of those intersections are currently under 10-second delay, and they're rated as an LOS A. In the transportation element, we have updated the tables that show, so the tables are on page 38 of the track change document. And we've updated the tables to show not only the existing LOS for the intersections, both for Lopez and East Sound, but we've also we had asked Transpo Group to estimate what the 2036 projection would be for intersection LOS. So on those two tables, you can see that the existing LOS for those intersections is all above C, so is all within what the industry standard would consider a reasonable delay at the intersections. And even in 2036, the only intersection that is expected to have intersection delays that exceed industry standards, or that 50-second delay, is the intersection at North Beach. It's an East Sound intersection at North Beach Road and Mount Baker Road. And that intersection is predicted to be at F. So it's predicted to be at 133 seconds, which is a pretty serious delay. So what we wanted to do was talk about the fact that one of the things that Shannon's going to ask you to consider in the goals and policies is what level of service. First of all, whether you want to adopt an intersection level of service, and if you want to adopt an intersection level of service, what level of service do we want to adopt as adequate? So we will recommend and will show you how and where in the goals and policies to insert that recommendation, and we'll get to that in just a minute. But once you accept, or if you were to accept an intersection LOS, and depending on where you set it, then that would drive our transportation improvement planning, so that when and if Mount Baker intersection at North Beach reached that delay or significant delay, that we would then start figuring out how best to improve the intersection, to reduce the delay, and put that intersection back into a level of service above the level of service that you set. It's kind of hard to talk about these hypotheticals, but the gist of it is that if and when we would then look at engineering solutions. And just so you have an idea of what those engineering solutions would look like, Transpo Group has predicted that if we were to change that from a two-way stop to a four-way stop or an all-way stop, that would eliminate, or that would improve the intersection so that it would become approximately 16 seconds of delay per vehicle, and would put that intersection back into an adequate level of service.
So, Christine?
Yes.
Good question, and I think you and I have talked about this in the past. At what time of the year was this survey done for the timing?
So the survey was done in the winter. I forget which month it was done, And then we adjusted it so that those numbers would reflect the seasonal variation that we see, so that it would reflect the worst case scenario for us. So we eliminated the worst case of ferry traffic for East Sound, but we did adjust it seasonally so that it would reflect what happens in the peak seasons of the tourism.
And then can you explain, I'm looking at your slide that has the yellow circle on the, I guess it'd be heading west on Mount Baker Road, turning left or turning south onto North Beach. Can you explain why that's the worst turning radius?
So as you're coming up North Beach and you are trying to make a left turn onto Mount Baker, you have to wait for the traffic to be clear, both left and right. If you were turning right, you would only have to wait for traffic coming from your left to clear. But a turning left requires you to wait the longest period of time.
Okay. And I struggle with that a little bit because it seems to me to be the least amount of traffic. But anyway, please continue.
So what you see there with those circles is the number of vehicles traveling, not the number of seconds. So what you see there is at the time when they did the 2 hour counting the cars, and then we adjusted it for the seasonal. That was how the data came out. As we go forward and we continue to look at our intersections, we can refine these intersection counts and their resulting traffic delays or vehicle delays. So, this was our first shot at this. It's kind of a one-time measurement. We can continue to evaluate the data and refine it, make sure it really represents a true picture. So I think that we all can agree that North Beach and Mount Baker intersection is the intersection that one of the intersections that we would be concerned about in the next 20 years. We can get more data and make sure it's more accurate as time goes on.
Great, thank you.
Any other questions about the concept of how the LOS for an intersection is set, the 20-year projection into 2036, and the kind of the concept of once we set a intersection LOS, how that would affect transportation planning.
Mr.
So, I'm just not quite getting this all in, but so if you put a four-way stop, does that reduce the time to 16 seconds now or in 2036?
They were looking at the future, so they were looking at the 2036 projection. So that it would also greatly reduce the delays now, but the delays now are not determined to be a problem. But it would, a four-way stop would improve it now, would improve it later. I don't know whether it would make it 16 seconds now or whether it would make it 9 seconds now. I'm not sure, what that number would be. That prediction is for 20 years at a 20-year volume.
So why would we set the level of service at F? Why wouldn't we just set it at B and at some point in the future need to do an always stop?
Rather than set it at D, so I moved back up to the screen that shows the level of service criteria. So at D, we would start looking at intersections that got to 35 seconds. And that would, even if we set it at D, the only intersection that fails the LOSD is that same intersection. All of the rest are A, B, C for 2019 and 2036. So we could indeed set it at F. We talked last time about the fact that you could set that at F. Town of Friday Harbor did kind of a creative thing. They set theirs at E, but changed the numbers for triggering up to 90 seconds instead of 50 seconds. So, Mr. Stevens, you could indeed set it at F, and that would be perfectly acceptable for our strategic planning.
Well, this is where I'm confused, Christine, is you're saying the recommendation is going to be to set it at F. And
No. My recommendation is to set it.
If we can get it down to 16 seconds, then why aren't we setting it at C?
We could. Well,
I know we could do a lot of things. I'm just trying to get the logic here. And if a four-way stop reduces the wait time to 16 seconds in the future, why are we setting something that's so high? To trigger improvements. I'm not trying to lobby for a four-way stop. I'm just trying to understand the methodology here.
Right. I guess the bigger question is, what would the community feel is tolerable versus not tolerable for a delay at a stop sign? So is 35-second delay acceptable to the community? Because that's the real question about the level of service and setting the LOS. So if we set the level of service to D, we're acknowledging that, or we're estimating that the community would be okay with a 35-second delay at an intersection. And because this is all relatively new for us, and because we're seeing that our current delays at intersection are pretty short, I don't necessarily think that our community would have it be distressed at 35 seconds. And I would hate to drive intersection changes for 35 seconds if that's not necessary for the community.
I mean, I'm sorry, Ms. Stevens, I don't interrupt your train.
I'm just not catching this, and the questions aren't really getting answered. So I'm not sure what we're adopting LOSD for. I was talking specifically about North Beach and Mount Baker Road as my example to try to follow the recommendation or how this is figured and how it's figured going forward. That's my specific question. And I don't even know where LOSD comes into this. So I just need a little clarification.
Okay, so if we set the LOS at goal or to LOSD, and
what is this for, though, Christine? Adopt D for what?
So if we, in the comprehensive plan, adopt LOSD as our standard, and if North Beach, Mount Baker intersection in the next 5 years, 10 years, maybe even next year is determined to have an intersection delay that exceeds 35 seconds, or looks like it's sneaking up on 35 seconds, because of development in the in the East Sound area or on Orcas. So if the development or the traffic patterns change such that that intersection exceeds 35 seconds, then that would, Public Works would put that intersection into the transportation improvement planning process to start engineering on improvements to reduce that back down to below 35. So 35 seconds would be our trigger for making intersection improvements. So the comp plan would say, if you have a intersection delay that exceeds 35 seconds, then the county should start making improvements to that intersection.
So we're really only adopting improvements for one intersection.
At
Because
this point,
because all the rest, the projection never even gets to C, or it does get to C, but it never gets any above it. So
correct.
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 So Jamie, maybe I can help. So the question is, what standard do we want for our intersections? Right? And so we set some level, and then Public Works does an assessment of all the intersections and goes, okay, these are all within the standard. Whoops, this one is exceeding the standard. We need to do some design work to reconstruct the intersection somehow, put in left turn lanes or something, to reduce the wait times to get within the standard.
right.
So, Mr. Hughes?
Yeah, can I make a comment first? Or, yes, Mr. Thomas?
You can go ahead. I was going to follow on to what Bill was saying.
No, go ahead.
Well, just tracking on what Christine is saying. So adopting this policy does set the level of service for intersection based on time or inconvenienced measured in seconds. So that's part of the equation. And then Bill and Christine are right about that policy drives our transportation improvement program, but it also gives the county a trigger to require, when development occurs, contributions towards those projects. So any of the intersections that we feel we're going to fall below that adopted level of service allows us to get a contribution from those that are doing development, and they generate traffic that negatively impacts the level of service at those intersections.
All right, so, I think it's great that we're starting to collect the data on level of service. I think it's important for us to have an understanding on what our level of service is today, 5 years from now, 10 years from now, and in the future. But I'm not real comfortable setting these timing when we haven't even heard anything from the community in that I'm aware of, and at least not in large amounts, that there's a problem yet. And I understand this is for the future, but I don't want to support something that has an opportunity to mess with the rural character of the community, and to set a guarantee that if we hit this one number, that automatically we're going to start thinking about building improvements on intersections. I don't mind tracking it and saying, that we should really consider going out to the public when we get to a D or E level. But I don't like the fact that we're putting something in the comprehensive plan that dictates a project 20 years from now, or 15 or whatever it might be. So I appreciate the data, but I personally do not support a definite active inclusion into this comprehensive plan.
So, Mr. Hughes?
Yes?
I understand that, but from a very GMA-centric exercise responsibly standpoint, the purpose of this is that we do plan for the urban areas over the next 20 years. So we're in a very fortunate position because even at a level of service D, we really aren't going to have to do anything for many years. But this is a great tool to figure out our transportation solution. So it has a lot of benefit to the comp plan in how we try to accommodate for growth over time. So you can understand how this ties into the land use decisions that we'll be making it in the urban growth area, because if we change the land use designations, then we're going to generate traffic possibly.
Right.
And then we're going to be back to this conversation about what is acceptable for traffic delay and traffic improvement, and what do those things look like. So I want to tie the land use with the traffic under the GMA discussion.
Great. I'm glad that we're considering this and starting to have a data set that we're going to be collecting. But again, I don't want to, and I could support that we need to consider intersection improvements when we hit a certain time segment. But as was pointed out earlier, there's really only one intersection where this could be an issue in the future. So it seems strange to me to putting a requirement in countywide through the comprehensive plan that is really only affecting one street. So again, I'm very supportive of collecting the data and to monitoring it, and even making a suggestion for consideration of improvements at a certain level. But to put that in and require it to be something that we do going forward because we've hit this number, I don't support at this point.
So I would also like to go on to the next couple of slides, because they talk about another way that the intersection LOS could be used in future planning. So if one of the things that we asked Transpo Group to do was to look at some future road improvements, and these are just things that, from a land use perspective, from a development perspective, were things that we thought might be future roadway improvements or future roadway changes. So we had a Transpo Group in Lopez look at two things: what would be the long-term demands on Weeks Road, and based on those demands through land use changes or projected development, are we going to need roadway improvements? And then also we looked at kind of a new idea of, are we going to need a connector road between Hummel Lake and Crossroad? When we looked at that for Lopez Village, we did not see any need to improve Weeks Road, nor did we see any need to add that north-south connector. The Transpo Group did make a note that we may want to put in some bike and walk improvements to Weeks Road, but no actual roadway improvements. When we looked at East Sound, we looked at three really kind of interesting ideas. One was the A Street connection. One was getting a road going north out of the school to connect the school to Mount Baker. And then we looked at Crescent Beach closure. And you'll see in the notes here that A Street, unless there's a real change in traffic patterns or some other safety reason, they didn't see that we needed to add that connector. They also didn't see that we needed to add that connector to the north out of the school. They did acknowledge that it would make traffic flow better, but from a volume standpoint, they didn't think that that was a critical connection. Where we did see some impacts to the community, and it'd be no surprise to you that if we close Crescent Beach Road, that will drive some intersection improvement needs at not just North Beach and Mount Baker, but also Lover's Lane and Mount Baker, and also Prune Alley and School Road. All three of those intersections would become impacted if traffic was routed a different way, if Crescent Beach wasn't a thoroughfare. So the reason I mention that is that this LOS intersection standard allows us to look forward into development, like looking at new roads, or in the sea level rise concerns about closing roads. So it provides not only information for land use and impact of development, but also on forward planning for roadway issues. So I just wanted to put a little bit of color commentary on another use for the LOS standards. We've already talked about that if the intersection delays will be evaluated periodically. If the LOS is degrading, we would look at improvements, and that the improvements would go through the standard development process. And what we're really recommending is that in our transportation planning process, we would include the LOS, intersection LOS assessments as one of the assessments that we do in our capital transportation planning process. So now before we go on any further, I wanted to make sure that I have captured your comments about the intersection LOS. Rick, I noted the information about perhaps it would be better to have continue to track and monitor the data rather than setting a goal. So we've noted that, and also Mr. Thomas's comments about the importance of LOS for land use decisions. And development, holding developers accountable for impacts to the intersections.
So Christine, just to clarify, I don't even mind if we set a goal as long as the goal doesn't automatically trigger an action.
Okay, okay.
My whole point was this: I just don't want it to be this sort of autopilot that kicks in a project. If we get to a level D or the 35 seconds or whatever the benchmark is, that's why I want to still collect the data. And then at that point in time, we have the discussion that, here we are in a situation that's not improving or is getting worse. And here is the criteria that we had that we should consider this. Should we consider it now? As opposed to hitting it and then all of a sudden it's now in the 20-year capital project array and it's moving forward automatically.
That makes sense. And when we get to the goals and policies, we can look at how that's worded and see if there's ways to make sure that it's clear that that doesn't mandate improvements, that it just starts the engineering design process.
Or at least the conversation.
Mm-hmm.
Is something at this point in time that Council and Public Works would like to look at, and the community, of course. Has Planning Commission seen this?
Planning Commission is going to see this on Friday.
Great.
They've seen most of it, so they've seen all of the changes that were proposed, and we ran through those proposals with them in March. So we'll be going back and they'll be looking at what you're seeing right here for this go-round.
Great, thank you. Mr. Watson, did you have any comments?
There we go. Sorry. No, not at this time. Thanks.
And Mr. Stevens, I think I cut you off earlier. Did your questions get answered?
Yeah, they did. I understand.
Ready to move on as well.
So we're going to transition into Shannon's goals and policies and do a change here.
Hello, this is Shannon Wilbur with Public Works. Moving on to part 2 now. As Christine had mentioned, the transportation element of the comprehensive plan is broken into 2 parts. And she reviewed with you the updates to Appendix 6, which was transportation, excuse me, which provides the data and the analysis that feeds into the transportation element where we define the goals and policies. And as was mentioned, we had done a fairly extensive presentation to you a number of months back. And so what I have for you today is just those parts that have been updated since that time based upon public comments that we have received. And when I presented before with the public comments we had at the time, I gave you examples of how we were incorporating or responding to those comments, and I'm going to continue in the same vein here. So to start with, we received a number of comments from the San Juan County Agricultural Resource Committee, and many of their comments had to do with items that are already codified, but they wanted to emphasize it and have them included in the transportation element to make sure that they were front and center as a way of defining how important agriculture is to the county. And so those policies that we have drafted up and included in the track changes version you have before you are the ones on the slide here. First has to do with livestock on ferries. To support safe and effective transport of livestock on ferries, which actually is already included in the WAC for Washington State ferries, and it specifically states that this is for the San Juan Anacortes run to make sure that livestock gets preferential loading onto the ferries. We did add it as a new policy. And I'll go through all of these and then we can have discussion on whether you are in agreement with the direction we've gone here or not. The next two bullets, the second and third bullet, actually we combined into one policy, which states that we support agriculture in the county, continuing to allow unrestricted movement of farm equipment and machinery, as well as unrestricted driving of livestock on county roads in a responsible and prudent manner. That's listed in the policy section of 6.5, which is land transportation. And I wanted to note that is already a county code number 6.04.10 as far as the livestock goes. So that is already allowed. But this does emphasize it by putting it in our planning document. And then the last bullet there has to do with noxious weeds. And we do have a couple policies referring to noxious weeds and what can and can't be done. But based on this comment, what we've done is consolidated that into one and simplified it. So we simply state that we support the control of noxious weeds along county road right-of-ways with environmentally responsible practices as currently stated in San Juan County Code 18.60.90. Because the wording was a little bit different between the code and we want to be real careful of redundancy. So trying to simplify that so we can be consistent. So these are three new policies that you that are new since you saw the document this winter. So do you have any thoughts or comments on this?
Yeah, Shannon, this is Rick.
Hi, Rick.
Sorry, quick question. What does environmentally responsible practices mean?
What the county code says is no herbicides or pesticides can be used within the county road right away.
Great, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Mr. Watson?
Yeah, so your first bullet there about supporting safe and effective transport, i.e. priority loading of livestock on ferries. What's the current policy there, Mr. Hughes?
We'd have to check it with ferries. I think if you have a priority loading, I think it's still a priority loading. It wouldn't be ahead of medical, but it would be ahead of reservations if they're given enough time.
Yeah, and actually, if I can add to that, you are supposed to get a reservation, but the Agricultural Resource Committee particularly wanted to have that here because of the islands where we do not have reservations. So just wanted to confirm that livestock do get preference. But of course, I believe you're right, Rick, that medical is first, but that livestock doesn't have to sit out in the sun.
And my suggestion would be to reference the WAC that already addresses that, and I can try to find that for you.
I do have it. It's WAC 468-300-700, and I can put that into the policy itself.
And does that mean they don't have to be there 30 minutes before the scheduled departure time?
Yes, they still do, is my understanding on the reservation. And I'm not sure if the WAC specifically addresses that because it's a policy outside of the WAC that ferries did for reservations, which only affect our route and the Port Townsend route. But they would have a priority load ahead of other reservation holders. Right. But they still have to meet the reservation requirements of 30 minutes prior to sailing.
Right. Well, again, I think that's their concern on hot sunny days, sitting there in line for 30 minutes can cause overheating of the animals, I guess, is one of the concerns. So
I can follow up with ferries on that if you'd like.
I just want to make sure we're clear. I mean, there's no reason to put a goal in our comprehensive plan that isn't necessarily supported by Washington State Ferry policies, and we might have to restate it to say work with Washington State Ferries, to do this, right?
Yes, although if it is our goal, that is what our desired long-term effect is. It may not, it may not 100% be what ferries is doing. It doesn't mean we can't change that and push it.
Right. Okay.
I mean, in this day and age, with the issues we're having with ferries, I think the more we can do to protect all travel, regardless if it's just passengers or even our livestock, we need to put that as an important part of our transportation plan.
Okay, and any other discussion on the potential new policies that we've inserted then? I understand that for the first one there, livestock on ferries, we will reference the WAC. And I'll go back and confirm what the wording in there is to see if we need to add anything more to this. But sounds like you're in agreement on the other policies?
Yep.
Okay, great. Moving on. Public comments on existing port of entry. Gotten a number of comments on this, primarily from Orcas residents. And so I wanted to give you some background as to where these two goals originated and how they've developed. And back in 2013, when the transportation element was updated, two goals were added. 6.2 is in the transportation financing, saying that we would work with state and federal legislators to consider the creation of ports of entry on Lopez and Orcas. And then goal 6.3 is in the air transportation section, where it was stated we'd explore the establishment of these ports on the two islands that do not currently have them. So that was added 7 years ago. And just to make sure we're all on the same page, the definition of a port of entry is that it's a harbor or an airport where people or goods may enter a country. And currently we have one on San Juan Island, which is here in Friday Harbor. In this update of the transportation element, we added the word international.
Actually, I'm sorry, Shannon. We have two on San Juan Island. It's the Port of Friday Harbor and Roach Harbor, are both ports of entry.
Oh, thank you for that correction.
And in fact, it's the marina in the town of Friday Harbor and the airport in the town of Friday Harbor.
You are correct on that, yes.
Okay.
So So a number of ports on San Juan Island.
Okay.
And in 2020, what we did was add the word international to port of entry for clarification, for further understanding. And we did receive a number of comments once that took place, all in protest against the consideration of port of entries being added to Lopez or specifically Orcas as being costly and unnecessary, since port of entries on San Juan Island should be sufficient. So at this point, those goals are still in the transportation element. We wanted to get some guidance from you as to whether that's something that you would like to leave in and pursue, or if you would like to consider removing those two goals.
Mr. Stevens?
Did you hear from the ports of Orcas or Lopez?
No, only from citizens.
I mean, I don't see this happening by 2036 on Lopez anyway. So, you know, I wouldn't have a problem with it being deleted. I'm not going to speak for Orcas.
And I agree. I would. I think I was who brought up at least the Orcas part in the past, but I would not have a problem removing it from this document. Agreeing with Stevens' points in the likelihood of it even happening. Also understanding some concerns the community may have with additional federal presence in the community. Also with the understanding that the facilities currently available on San Juan Island make it relatively accessible for someone who would like to, from the other islands, travel to Friday Harbor to have the ability for port of entry going to Canada. So I would support removal.
Okay, I
right.
will.
Sorry, Councilmember Watson, I agree. Might as well strike it.
Okay, then as we make modifications to this, we will plan to remove goals 6.2B9 and 6.3A3. Thank you.
Okay, the document is slimmer already.
I know, which has been an overall goal to try and make this more efficient and not so wordy. Okay, when we talked before, back in March, I told you there were a number of comments we received based on environmental issues, which primarily centered around climate change and electrification of transportation. And with the additional comments we have received since that time, that is still the case. During that time, Council has also been working on a climate change resolution, which it turns out is very timely, because the transportation portion of that resolution encompasses so many of the comments that we have received. And so as a way of responding to all of those, what we have done is work to incorporate the different items within the transportation portion of the climate change resolution. So this is a pretty dense slide here, but I wanted to go through it, show you what we are proposing, see if you have any modifications that you would like. And then after this, I can show you the types of comments we were getting and how they all fit within the resolution. So it was a very organized way to be able to address all those comments. The first is encouraging telecommuting and teleconferencing for county business. And we actually already did have a policy very, very similar to that, and it just required minor modifications under the general transportation communications section. So that was minor to make that change. The next bullet is, when feasible, switching to electric vehicles for county fleet purchases. That has been added as a new policy under general transportation, because this could apply to all modes of transportation within the county. So we put that under the general transportation section. providing recharge stations at key destinations throughout the county. Once again, that's under general transportation because it's very likely if we move forward to providing recharge stations, that could happen at parking lots of ferry terminals or anywhere within the UGAs or at the airports. So it's under general transportation. This fourth bullet here, we have, once again, underneath general transportation because it applies to all modes. And at the full goal reads, support and incentivize interconnected multimodal transportation options, including conversion to electric vehicles, buses, vans, shuttles, taxis, rideshare, and rental programs. So a very comprehensive goal that has been added to the transportation element.
Shannon?
Sam?
Yes.
Go ahead, Jamie.
To me, that convert to electric vehicles doesn't seem to fit in that goal. I mean, if you're going to do interconnected multimodal transportation, ride share and rental programs are one way to approach that. I don't know what convert electric vehicles has to do with interconnected multimodal transportation.
Go ahead, Rick.
No, I agree with what Mr. Stevens said, and I have another comment about the point, but let's finish this discussion.
Okay, so I can see what you're saying, and we can take another look at it. Perhaps it's rewording it, because you're right, the multimodal, ride share, the rental, the buses, the taxis, or maybe break it into two, if that's more appropriate. So I will go back and take a look at the resolution and see how that was worded there, see if I had mixed things up when I took that out.
So Shannon, do you think the intent was to support interconnected multimodal transportation utilizing electric vehicles? For the multimodal transportation?
As appropriate, yes.
Yeah.
And I'm trying to remember the conversion to electric, where I got that, if that wasn't in the resolution, which...
Because I think we want to do both, right? We want to support and incentivize people to convert to electric vehicles, and we would like to support and incentivize interconnected multimodal transportation options.
Right.
Yeah.
And that might be...
They're both very important, but they're not interconnected necessarily.
Right.
Right. So it's probably more appropriate to break those out into two separate items as opposed to having them all under one. And I hear what you're saying, and we'll go back and take another look at that and see how we might modify that.
Great.
Thank you. And on the same multimodal transportation, I don't know what council thinks, but I'd love to figure out a way to incorporate with regional and state transportation partners for the interconnectivity. I don't know if that's getting too deep on this point, but I mean, we can't do it by ourselves. So,
right.
Things across counties, which in transportation world, especially when it comes to mass transit, become a little bit more difficult. So if we can, it's part of it's in our state plan to potentially allow counties to cross borders to work together, and then to keep moving forward as a kind of at least a 5-county region to implement transportation connectivity.
And that, Yeah, there are actually a number of policies toward the end under intergovernmental and regional coordination, starting on page 33 of 35. So toward the end of the document, a number of goals and policies related to that that are in existence.
Okay, I'll take a look and let you know if I see something.
Okay, all right. Okay, the next bullet requests that Washington State Ferries prioritize the San Juan Islands ferry service for electric ferries. And that has been included in 2 new policies. 6.4 is the marine transportation section, Washington State Ferries Marine. And section 6.6 is the intergovernmental section, which I was just referring to. And so there is a new policy that was added there to working with state ferries for encouraging that to happen.
Is it possible to add hybrid electric instead of just electric? Because it looks like because of the length of our route, it might be really difficult to have an electric only ferry, and Washington State Ferries' next 5 ferries plan to be hybrid electric.
Yes, in fact, what's on the slide here is a very truncated version. Let me read to you what the actual new policy is under 66A18. It reads, work with the governor, legislature, and WSF to prioritize the San Juan Islands for construction of new, quieter, hybrid electric ferries to modernize our aging fleet, ensure reliable ferry service, and benefit our waters and whales. So that's the new policy right now that's in that section.
Mr. Hughes?
Yes, sir.
Sorry.
Yes.
Jamie popped out, so I didn't know if he was before me.
Go ahead, Mike.
Oh, Rick, on the ferry technology, isn't really efficiency and cleanliness the goal instead of fuel source? By the time we get a new ferry, we may be using some fuel source we don't know of today.
Yes, but I'm not sure the technology, even in 10 years from now, could support a fully electric ferry here. So maybe it's electric hyphen hybrid electric, but I want to make sure that when we're asking, because they do take our transportation element very serious, that we're asking for the next technology, the greener technology that we have, that the current plan for the next 15 years is hybrid electric. So hybrid could be many things, but it just means that there might need to be an alternative source of propulsion besides just the electric.
No, I get that. I guess I'm questioning, why are we identifying any type of propulsion? Why don't we just we don't know what we're going to get. I mean, if we got one that burned diesel tomorrow, at least we'd have a new ferry serving the islands.
I think the intent is that because our community is and Jamie, you might want to correct me here, but because of the proximity we have with the whales in our community and the fact that we have surplus electric capacity through Opalco, that our community thinks that we would be a model example of where a hybrid electric should be in the system. And so we want to continue. Obviously, we will take whatever ferry, new or old, that we're given if it improves our service, but the goal is to get on the list, and Senator Loveland has promised one of the next 4, if they're built, of hybrid electric to be in San Juan County. So I think I think the community supports it, and it's important to request that one of the new ferries come our direction. But as you point out, we will take whatever we can get.
So
I think it could be shorter, just a WSF prioritized San Juan service for a ferry that works. Just musing. If we're in line for one of the new ferries, that's the most important part.
Okay, so based on the discussion I heard, sounds like perhaps modify as electric/hybrid electric, or modify based upon energy efficient ferry? Sounds like we need to do some wordsmithing here to make sure we get the intent, but don't limit ourselves.
That's fine if that's what we're looking for. I mean, Washington State Ferries has stated in their long-range plan that every boat they build in the future will be hybrid electric.
Okay, so I can certainly leave that in there, which is what we have right now. And we do reference Washington State Ferries long-range plan, their 2040 plan in here also. Just want to make sure what we have here is with the agreement of all council members.
What you have is great.
Yes, I agree.
Yeah.
Okay, so the last bullet here covers a wide range of items. Institute a policy of managed retreat for public infrastructure. And this is greatly truncated from what had been listed in the transportation or the climate change resolution for the slide. But that was added under general transportation goals and policies, which are section 6.2. And the wording actually has been elaborated to focus around adaptation and resiliency of the community, the environment, and financial resiliency. And we've also added this concept under county marine policies and land transportation goals and policies, because it's a new concept that hasn't really been captured within the transportation element before, and it has far-reaching consequences and support among a number of the comments that we received. So we have added that, and you'll be able to see that as you review the track changes copy of the document that you have. So as I said when I started this slide, your resolution is very timely. And so the next two slides I want to show you are kind of a compilation of some of the comments that we've received with these categories and how well it fits within the goals and policies we developed based upon your resolution. So one category is electrification of transportation. And as you might guess, a number of these comments came from Opalco, but also from a number of individual community members also. And just to quickly run down these, to incentivize and support the development of clean transportation alternatives, which you have in your resolution. To facilitate the improvement and conversion of, or convenience of energy efficient mass transit vehicles, and also multimodal, such as car sharing, cycling, and walking. To facilitate remote working and telecommuting. To install charging stations at key locations countywide, and to support the electrification of all transportation facilities. So this was important to a number of folks that we received comments from. And so that has been incorporated, as I showed you with the previous slide, with your direction from the climate change resolution. The next slide focuses on the environmental considerations and very strongly on the climate change portion of it. And we received a number of comments, a number from Friends of the San Juans who were very much supportive of the goals and policies that we had supported or had installed in the last version from this past winter, and certainly more so now. And there were other comments also that provided a little bit of wordsmithing to help strengthen the intent of these goals and policies, such as adding flood and erosion hazards to discussions of sea level rise and storm surge. Once again, to emphasizing all the different methods of resilience that we'll be looking for. And as you had stated, to provide for the managed retreat of our transportation infrastructure away from locations that are vulnerable. And comments also were supportive of what you had recommended, that we work with Washington State Ferries to upgrade our fleet of ferries to the islands here to have cleaner, quieter vessels to benefit both the waters and the wells, and then of course to have more reliable ferry service. And this is in keeping with the goals that Washington State Ferries has within their long-range plan also. So we are in accordance with them on that. So just kudos to you for your climate change resolution. It actually made our job much easier as we were working on the transportation element here.
So Shannon,
Yes.
what does that add flood and erosion hazards mean?
As you are taking a look at the impact of sea level rise, you also should be aware of flooding that will take place in the area, and we have a number of locations that are susceptible to erosion from from storm surges or from excessive rainfall as our climate changes. We have a number of areas that are within our critical areas that are at risk with climate change impacts. So it's just adding more specifics to it to make sure that we are comprehensive in our evaluation.
Not sure about that one. It's
If
like
you
it could
like,
be in conflict with the managed retreat of transportation and infrastructure.
I'll tell you what, if you like, I can tell you where all of those new proposed policies are.
Okay.
Let me and you can take a look and see what you think, take a closer look. So there, I believe, are in 4 places. There's 6.2A4, 6.2B9, that's under general transportation. Let me just thumb through here under county marine. So under 6.4C5, there is a policy. Consider the impacts of sea level rise and accompanying flood and erosion hazards and opportunities to improve resiliency when evaluating new development or maintenance of marine facilities. There is another one under land transportation, and it is 6.5A10. Ensure that county road standards and practices are updated to reflect climate change projections and that new roads are sited appropriately and protected from sea level rise, increased flood and erosion hazards, and storm surge. So that's how that wording was incorporated in those areas.
Okay.
And you can take, since these are new that were added since you last looked at it, if you'd like to take more time to consider that and then provide some guidance after you've had a chance to look at it more closely, that would be fine.
Okay.
Okay, before we go on to this next one, let me back up. Anything more that comes to mind when you think about climate change or the electrification of our transportation facilities?
Shannon?
Yes.
Could you define, again for me, the managed retreat of transportation infrastructure? I mean, would that include trails and pathways?
Yes, it certainly could if they are at risk based upon climate change. For bluff erosion, that's one category of erosion hazards. If we have trails along the coast that are at risk because of bluff erosion, then yes, we would want to consider relocating those trails if they were considered critical.
And have we adapted or produced mapping or at least a conceptual idea of where climate impacted locations might be?
We have not done a full evaluation of that so that I would have a figure to show you. No, we've done some very rudimentary looks at that, but not a full-scale evaluation.
And while I support the concept of this, I want to make sure there's no unintended consequences for other projects like, you know, trail system throughout the county that could be impacted by that point. While at the same time, you know, protecting the environmentally sensitive areas.
Mm-hmm.
You know, Rick, I think it's not so much, I mean, it is environmentally sensitive areas, but it's also just looking forward. You know, our two biggest examples are Agate Beach and Crescent Beach, you know.
No, I agree. I just, you know, it'd be, you know, I'm very interested in seeing what a long-term trail network would look like, and need to make sure that we know where we can or can't do that. And I completely agree with what you're saying. Just want to make sure if we're planning something like that, that we know what the future implications could be so we could plan around it.
I see.
I just want to make sure that the managed retreat isn't of the whole transportation system, but it's really just an environmentally or climate sensitive areas.
And I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, I just said, does that make sense? I mean, I'm not against this. I just want to make sure I understand what the totality of that would be for the future.
So if we were to provide a figure for you showing those areas that look to be vulnerable and that could potentially require managed retreat in the future, that will give you the information you need to make a determination if you're comfortable with these goals and policies?
I would like to see that. I can't speak for Jamie or Bill.
Well, I mean, basically it comes down fundamentally to the fact that, basically it comes down to the fact that if we have infrastructure in place that's being affected by climate change and sea level rise, that we need to move it, right? And so whether it's a trail or a road that's being flooded or eroded, you know, doesn't matter. It's a matter of planning around it so that we maintain our infrastructure, but eliminate it from being hazardous as a result of climate change.
Right.
I mean, just like on Lopez, right? We did a lot of planning about moving a road because it's falling into the, you know, eroding into the water.
Right.
No, and Bill, I completely agree with you. I just want to make sure that it's I mean, you could look at the managed retreat of transportation infrastructure as an item for the whole county, or as it's further defined from climate impacted locations. And I just want to make sure that that's more defined.
Okay.
I agree with what you're saying, and I understand that. And Jamie's examples were great for Agate Beach and Crescent Beach. I just want to make sure that there's that second part of it that just talks about areas that are impacted for sea level rise specifically.
Or climate change.
For climate change, correct.
Right.
Because managed retreat of transportation infrastructure could be a climate change goal or policy. And so, regardless of the climate impacted location. So I just want to make sure that the language is defined so we understand what we're voting on.
Hey, I'm happy with the current wording because it says away from climate impacted locations.
And I agree.
And that's, I would like to see maybe where we are kind of pinpointing though. That'd be great. But I'm fine with the wording.
Yep, okay.
All right,
And
thank
I
you.
wanted to look at those sections on erosion hazards, just because, again, if we don't want unintended consequences, one person's erosion hazard is another person's feeder bluff.
That's right. Erosion is a natural
Feeder
process.
bluff.
That is true. So they're almost one and the same when you're talking about this type of a policy.
Yep.
Yeah, that's why thank you for those references. So that's why I wanted to check them out.
Yeah. Okay. So I will work to get a figure put together, and in the meantime, we'll plan to revisit this and see if there's anything more that's needed.
Great.
Great.
Thank you very much.
Okay. Yeah. Moving on, we have a couple, what I call fill in the blank policies, based upon. This first one is based upon a couple public comments that we received wanting a policy added. And right now it's been added under general transportation financing, is wanting to have a fund identified for clean transportation initiatives. And there were a couple examples in the comments we received that you might consider a lodging tax or a gasoline carbon tax. And so at this point, we simply have a blank as opposed to naming a funding source. We wanted you to be able to have the ability to discuss this and see if this is a new policy you would like. And if so, this is probably a difficult time to ask, but where would you want the money to come from to fund that type of an initiative?
And we have no such fund.
Yes.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And what exactly would clean transportation initiatives be from the county level?
Well, I expect it would be something like having hybrid electric vehicles, having charging stations.
Yep.
Those things that are included elsewhere in the document, but to be able to, based upon the comments we received, to be able to show that we are fully committed to it, that we do have funds in place to develop those.
Okay.
So, Mr. Hughes,
Yes, sir.
this goes from a policy to a directive. So I understand the policy intent to use some form of transportation or lodging tax dollars to help achieve this goal, but saying you will use some identified fund, I think unnecessarily handcuffs the county, especially as we try to figure out what reality is over the next couple of years.
I mean, I would much prefer to see it. The county will attempt to or look for funding to, create clean energy and support clean transportation initiatives.
Which we already have in another place,
We
right?
already have.
Yeah.
Or we could just not even think about this.
Yeah.
I think Mike makes a good point, unless it's a portion of our Opalco bill.
Which, oh, by the way, we're reducing.
Sounds like we're going to not add another item to the transportation plan. How about that?
Okay, so we will remove this new policy.
I mean, in all seriousness, that's the direction, correct?
Yep.
Yes.
All right, thank you.
Okay, and as you say, we do talk about it elsewhere in the funding, transportation financing section, that you support measures to protect the environment as far as greenhouse gas emissions and support electrification. So it is in there, your intention to support all that. You simply aren't naming a particular funding source to do that. So your intent is there, though. Okay, this second fill in the blank policy goes back to the discussion that you had with Christine on the intersection level of service. And right now it's under section 6.5, which is land, where we talk about level of service. And we've added, let me get to the right spot here, 6.5 C3. Added a policy for intersection level of service where we were going to identify which LOS letter it would be based upon the evaluation that was done. And the recommendation had been to make it LOS D. But I know there was some discussion, and I'm not sure that you necessarily landed on that.
I'm not there yet.
Can I ask a question on this? Two questions. One is, when we're talking about setting speed limits, the rule of thumb is whatever 80% of the people are going. So how do you figure out at what point people are going to take more chances, take more risk to get through the intersection than they should?
Accident count.
Well, we have they list how many seconds at the intersection for each level, and a lot of that will come from the community, what they're willing to tolerate. But you think about if you're at an intersection, even 15 or 20 seconds seems like a long time. We're pretty spoiled out here because we don't usually have to wait very long, as opposed to if you live on the mainland. So I don't know if there is a certain number where people lose it and then they just take chances and go for it. But I think it might be a smaller number here than you might find elsewhere.
And even though Friday Harbor is a town, it's kind of technically an urban growth area. And wouldn't we be concerned about the intersections that are county intersections that are interfacing with the town?
Yeah, we actually did not consider that. We were strictly looking at our UGAs, East Sound and Lopez Village. There are the intersections that overlap with the town, although they are out a ways from the core. So the ferry impact is diluted a bit.
And frankly, I can't think of any intersections that are actually at the town boundary. I mean, typically we have, the road entry point, but not it's not an intersection point, right?
Yeah. Okay. Thank you for clarifying that, Bill. And Shannon?
Mm-hmm. And
so Shannon, for this policy, we could set a general goal for intersection LOS, but then allow for specific targets for specific intersections in the future, correct?
We could. That gets a little more complicated than just having one that applies to all of them, that you set it to such a point that, it would take a lot to trigger it. Let me add one thing to the discussion, because I know there was concern about this automatically being triggered, and then we have a project before the community really hears much about it. But we have a policy right now, and this is for the collector roads, where we have a LOSD, but we could add something like this to the intersections also. The policy says when a county collector road, AADT, exceeds the LOSD standard, perform a traffic study to evaluate alternatives to increase capacity and or decrease demand. By doing that, if we were to do that for the intersections as they start reaching the trigger point, that would give the we could do the evaluation, and that would then give the information that we could go out to the community to talk to them about what it is they are willing or willing to support if they find that it is an issue at the intersection. So we could add a policy like that for the intersections also.
I like
if
that.
makes you more comfortable.
I like that.
I like it too.
Yeah, I like it as well. My biggest issue is that it automatically pushed the road or the intersection into a process, but that sounds good to me.
Okay.
So I'd suggest you set LOS as D and add that new additional policy that says if you exceed it, you trigger a review, a study, discussion, whatever.
Agreed.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay.
All right. Well, we can do that. And that is essentially the conclusion of my presentation, which was simply based upon the additional comments we had received. This was a summary of those comments. If you haven't been able to do it yet, I recommend if you go out to the county webpage, all the individual comments are out there. And you can see if there's anything else that you thought should have been addressed that we didn't pick up on. Also, if you have anything else that comes to mind after our discussion here before we head to Planning Commission that you would like to see incorporated or considered other than what we've discussed so far.
We'll let you know.
Okay.
Okay.
Looked good to me.
In conclusion,
sorry.
All right, I'm just going to wrap up last slide. In conclusion, I just wanted to stress the fact that the transportation element is the first in the process for defining what makes up our transportation system and the process for how we get from, this initial planning, a very not specifically defined areas down to actually building a capital project, a maintenance project, or defining a program. It's a multi-step process, and this is the beginning of it, which is important to set the guidelines for what we have as we get down the road later on, so to speak. So this is important, and so it's I appreciate you taking the time to go through and evaluate this and help us pull this together.
Great. Thank you, Christina and Shannon. And Council, if you do have an opportunity to look over the entire document prior to the Planning Commission meeting and you'd like to provide comments, if you could forward that to Shannon and Christina and just copy via Ingrid to the rest of us. And if you're okay with where we're at, then we'll just move forward and see what Planning Commission brings back.
Yep.
Thank you.
Alrighty, thank you, Shannon. So real quick, we're obviously going to break for lunch. I need to know, are there any time constraints today?
No.
Just gets dark at some point.
Yes, I'm aware of that one. Thank you.
Well, in my headset already ran out of battery.
All right, so let's take an hour break, be back at 2 o'clock, have a recess for lunch. Is that all right?
Yep, sounds good.
See you at 2.
Thank you.